Well, hello, Worcester fly tying people. Is this a Fly Dressers Guild branch, is it? It is. Yeah. It's great doing these virtually, because when I go and do them in person I tend to be stoned because I use quite a lot of super glue and I quite enjoy using super glue. So there'll not be much of that today because I'm trying to improve my ways. So I'm going to start off with this little badger that you might have seen flicking in between cameras, and it's a freestyle wet fly, and it's probably designed for the Irish lochs as a bob fly, as an attractor fly to bring trout into a cast of maybe more drab and fish taking type flies. So I'm just going to put my gigs on and we'll get this out of the vise, and I'm going to add in the hook I'm going to tie the fly on. Now I hope it's clear in the picture. Please let me know if it's not quite right. Now the hook I've put in the vise is a Hanak H25XH. Now it's a barbed hook, but as you can probably notice I've crushed the barb down. I really like this length of shank. It's just the perfect hook, other than the fact that it's obviously got a barb on. The thread I'm going to be using is a trout line. It's a nano silk in black, and please excuse my voice. I've been suffering terribly since about December with various bugs and colds, but hopefully this evening, that coupled with a Scottish accent, you've probably not got a clue what I'm saying, but I'm going to do my best. I'm just getting some wax onto my nano silk, and then I'm going to lay down, catching just behind the eye, and we'll lay down a bed of waxed nano silk. Now these flies, they're a guilty pleasure. I don't really fish them, if I'm honest. I don't get a chance to go out to Ireland and fish the big Irish lochs, and I'm very rarely up in Scotland when this type of fly would do particularly well. I'm usually on Rutland with my blobs and boobies, and so this is more a fly tying exercise than anything else. So I've got a feather here. It's a pheasant tail, and it's been dyed picric, and I'm going to take about half a dozen fibres from the stem, and all I'm doing, just off camera actually, is I'm just pushing all the fibres up so that the tips kind of meet. Doesn't need to be 100%, but good enough for government work. I want the length to be just longer than the shank of the hook, so I'm going to catch that in. Now when I'm putting this down onto the shank, I've got it slightly towards me, so when I bring my thread over, it's bringing it on top of the shank. Now I'm just going to quickly come up, and I'm going to stop about maybe 1/4 of an inch back from the eye of the hook and take away the waste. Now I know it might be quite difficult in a big room like this, but if you do have any questions, please just holler. I'm happy to pause and answer any queries or abuse, whatever you care to hurl at me really. So the next thing then, I'm going to tie in a red wire. It's from Lure Flash, this one. It's just a red wire. It's quite a dull, muted red, I suppose. I'm going to catch that just on my side of the hook, just where I finished my wraps off, and then I'm going to come back down all the way to where I finished my tail. Next then, I'm going to use some Swiss straw here. It's you might have seen it in various different colours. It comes in yellow. It's used a lot for mayfly type patterns, but I've got the red and I quite like this for just adding for this particular pattern. So I've got a bit that I've taken off, and as you can see it's kind of translucent, which you get that effect on the body. So I'm going to come in, capture that in, and then again I'll bring my thread all the way up to about 1/4 of an inch back for the shank. Now it is fairly difficult to work with, especially when it splits on you like it has here. So I'm going to just fold that in, try and avoid the point of the hook, then I'll bring this all the way up, so I'm getting that nice red translucent body. Now as I get up towards my thread, I'm going to just tighten that all up, and then I can get a couple of turns to hold that into place, a couple of turns in front, then I can take away the excess. Now that was probably a wee bit thicker than I needed, if I'm perfectly honest, but it is what it is. So next I'm going to tie in my palmer for this fly, and I have, this is a bleached grizzle cape, and what I'm looking for is a fairly reasonable size of feather. Yeah, that'll do the job. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip back the feather, and then on the leading edge I'm going to make sure that I've taken out 2 or 3 fibres, just so that the fibres on the leading edge are there, but I've stripped out the bottom ones, and you'll see why I've done that in a moment, hopefully. So I'm going to catch that in there like so, and then if I can find my hackle pliers now, it's great, you know, you get to see the big fly in the vise and that, and I can now see, looking at the screen, I've missed a little bit, but hopefully I'll cover that up with my palmer. But the bench I'm working on is tiny. I've got a laptop, cameras. It's quite difficult to get everything in. But what I'm going to do with my palmer is bring it round, and I'm going to bring the turn on top of itself initially, and then I can bring my palmer around the hook. Then when it comes to meet the wire, I'm going to chase the hackle back up. So I'll catch the wire in, and I'm just working my way through the fibres. All the way back up to meet my thread. Get a couple of turns to hold that into place, and then I can helicopter away my wire. Next thing then, I can just tilt my vise come in and take away the excess palmer. So far so good, I think. And I have managed to cover up that little bit of mist. I'm just going to bring, there is just a stray fibre there I want rid of. I'm going to bring my thread back up to where I started my palmer. And what I'm going to do now is, I've got this quite a nice cock cape here. It's a lovely sort of colour, it's been dyed. And again, I'm just looking for a feather that's going to be adequate for the fly. Now the reason I'm tying in this feather in particular is I don't want the fly to collapse in the water. It's meant to fish in the top layers of the water, and I don't want the hackling all collapsing on me, if you like. So a little cock hackle just in behind the palmer. It's going to help that. Again, what I'm doing just off camera here is I'm getting rid of the fibres on the lower part of the stem, and then I can catch that in like so. Grab my hackle pliers. And what I'm looking for is about 2 to 3 turns. I can bring my thread over to meet that. Not overly worried about the little bits and bobs of fibre that's sticking out there. I'm going to lick my thumb and forefinger in my left hand, sweep everything back, and then I'm going to catch all that in, and then I can simply take away my tag end by ripping it away. So far so good. Now, just to make sure that's all going to stay open, I'm going to come in with an old toothbrush that I've got here. Just open up all them old fibres. So next we've got some French partridge. Again, this has been dyed orange. So it would have been helpful if I'd picked a feather out before we started, but I didn't. So I'm going to just go through now, find a decent feather. What I want from this, really, excuse me a sec, I'm trying to stay organised because I'm doing this all again tomorrow for people in work, so I'm trying to keep everything together. So I'm sorry?
So this is a dress rehearsal.
This? Oh no, I did that this afternoon. Hopefully this will go right. Unlike this afternoon, it all went wrong. So I'm going to strip away all the waste I've got here. And I'm not a great fan of French partridge, but it's good for this type of fly. It just really works well with it. Now, some people like to have a quite lightly dressed front hackle. I prefer mine to have a bit of substance about it. What I do still fish, even for the stocked rainbows, is flies like bumbles. I still think they're really effective, especially in September. And they're really bushy at the front. catch that in. Got plenty of wax on my thread, and then I'm going to bring that to the front. Okay, so I've got my my front hackle in place. I'm going to grab that, and then as I bring it round, I'm going to try and encourage the fibres to sweep back. Now I'm hoping that I have left enough room at the front here. It's looking not too bad. Might just about get away with it. Just stroking the feathers back as I go. I think it does help. And then as I come up, that's turned out better than it deserves. It's very rarely I get it this right, but it's just come where the fibres have finished. It's come perfectly to the front of the hook. So I'll get 2 or 3 turns in front, and then I'm going to just get a couple of turns in at the side, and then I can come in with my snips and take away the stalk. So all that's remained really is the stalk. I peeled back all the fibres so that was the hackle in its entirety onto the fly. The next thing then, simply to build a small neat head, and to finish the fly off, I'm going to use a touch of UV resin onto my thread. Then I can grab my whip finish tool and tighten it off. Now before I cut the thread away, I like to come in and just cure the resin. Now this does a couple of things. Doing it this way is you don't get your eye clogged up with resin, and you don't get the resin sucked up by your hackle feathers, making them all stiff. It keeps it nice and soft. Now what I've done with that toothbrush, here we go. And then as a final finishing flurry, if you like, I like to tie these occasionally because some folks think all I do is tie blobs and boobies. That'd be fairly accurate, to be fair, because that's what catches fish where I go fishing. But I do really enjoy tying these nice flies. So what do we think, folks? I'll just bring me back onto the screen. There we go. So that's the first one out the way. It went really well. I thought it went really well. What did you think, boys? You're very quiet. All right. You know what? I did do a fly. The Fly Dressers Guild at Surrey. Is it the Surrey Fly Dressers Guild? It might be. So I live in Surrey. And halfway through the evening, the boy said to me, "Oh, how Jig, it's going, Lindsay?" I said, "Well, I'm not so sure. It's very quiet." I says, "Do you think the boys are enjoying what I'm doing?" And he said, "Lindsay, I've never seen anyone stay awake till the interval. You've done really well." So it may be just an age thing, eh? You know, you like a wee kip in the afternoon after your tea. So that's a wee Irish wet. Let's see what else I've got in my box. Put this in the device so you can have a look at it and you can see what's coming next. Decide whether you're going to have a further 20 minutes kip or you might want to see this one. So let's have a... There we go. So this is a dry caddis. It's my take on a dry caddis anyway. It does work really well, and I often use this as part of a dry dropper rig if I'm on the rivers. I've never tried it on the still waters, but it works particularly well on the rivers. So we'll take that out of there, and I'll need to put my glasses back on. It's hard because I can't see the computer screen with the glasses on, and I can't see the flies with the glasses off. So I just flick between the two. Okay, next then I'm just going to put this in the vise slightly so it's not in the groove. I need to have that open. Now, to start off with this, I'm going to use some Glow number 12. It's a bright green thread, and I'm going to catch that on about 1/4 inch back for the eye of the hook. Now once I've got it started, I won't touch and turns. I'm just using my rat's tail here to guide it down, and that's as far as it's going to go. I'm going to take that off. Now what I'm going to use is some of these synthetic quills. You get them in various sizes. This is large. This is quite a large fly, size 8. I do tie these down to 16, and the smaller you go, the more effective they seem to be. But trying to tie 16s for a fly tying demonstration might be just a challenge too far for me. So I've ripped off the synthetic quill. It's very thin at one end, as you can see. I'm going to take that away. Now one side sticky that I've got here on my thumb, I'm going to put the non-sticky side down onto the shank of the hook, and then I'm going to continue to bring my Glow all the way down to the bottom here. Now what I'm going to do is just give my bobbkin a little anti-clockwise twist. I want to try and keep my thread, or floss should I say, quite thin at the bottom here. Now this takes a little bit of time, so please do talk amongst yourselves. I'm just going to build the body, or you could have another sleep, it's up to yourselves. I want to build like a cigar shaped taper into the fly. Now as I get down at the bottom, I'm going to flatten that all out again. Try not to do that, because very often the point of the hook will snap your floss. Okay, so we're done with the floss, thankfully, because it is not fun to work with. So I can take that away, and where I've caught the point of that hook, you can see it's causing some little strands to come off. So next thing then, I'm going to cast on some white nano silk. I'll just get a little bit of wax onto my thread. And if I can just bring it up, once I've got it onto the floss, I'm not worried about it slipping off. Now I'm going to put a few extra turns in at the head here, and then what I can do is grab my transparent quill and what I'm looking for is not quite touching turns with this, because I want that green body to really show through on the fly. So I'm just taking my time. The thing with this, because it's just tacky, even if you make a mistake, you're not obliged to keep going and put up with it. You can always go back and correct the error if you're a mind to do so. But so far so good. And it also covers up the sin of catching the tip of the hook point there, and just making sure that all that extra effort trying to get rid of them little strands out the way. So I've trapped it in and I'll trim that away. Now it's strong enough to just leave it as it is. You know, I could perfectly well go on and carry on with a fly, and this would be fine. It's quite a robust material, and it'd be very difficult for trout to rip the rib and make it fall to pieces. But what I always like to do with this, and I think it does set the body off a little, and it also helps cock the fly in the water, is just add a very thin layer of UV resin. You can, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, but when you put a UV torch on this, as I'm sure you know with your own tying, Glow Bright really pops under UV light, and that's what I was after from the body of this fly. So that's me cured the body. It's nice and dry. Next thing then is I'm going to add 2 plumes of Series C. I've got a bag here. The trout line stuff's usually quite good, but this has got quite a lot of junk in it as well. So there we go, that's a decent one. So I've got a couple of feathers here that I've picked out, and I'm just going to marry up the tips. So I've got 2 feathers, I'm going to marry up the tips like so. What I want is I don't want anything to protrude past the back end of the fly, so I'll just grab that in. A couple of turns, let me have a look. Yeah, that looks okay. Once I'm content, I'll get another couple of turns on top, lift the waist out the way, a few turns, and then I can come in with my fine point scissors and take away the excess. Now, the next bit is all about preparation. So I've got some elk hair here, and I'm going to snip off probably about half a centimetre's worth. I'll show you once I've cut it away. So I've got about half a centimetre here, and before I stick it into my hair stacker, which I'm not quite sure where it is. Oh, there it is. I'm going to brush. Sorry, I'm showing this up to the other camera, but I'm not on it. So I'm going to brush this out with a comb. Just get rid of any of the under fur and any of the slack ends. You don't want that in the fly. Then I can stick it into my stacker. Now I'm going to do this just on the other table here. And what I'm doing, just so you know, is I'm tapping it at an angle, and it tends to make all the feathers go to a curve, as hopefully you'll see once I've finished tapping. So all the feathers are bent the way they're supposed to go. Excuse me. And I'm left with just one stray there that I'm going to pick out. And again, I don't want this protruding past the butt of the fly. So I'm going to measure it up. That looks okay. I'll just grab a little bit of wax, and then over my waste bin here, I'm going to just trim that away. Then I can dress it up. Loose pinch and turn to hold it into place. And then as I tighten up, hopefully it will sit just nice. And that's not looking too bad. So the next thing then, I'm going to come back to my little bag of CDC, and I'm going to go hunting for a big CDC feather. I don't want to throw some of these little ones away because they'll do for another type of fly, so I'm just being pernickety. And I've got one here, so here's the feather. And what I'm going to do is I've got a little block here that I put the feather into to get, so I can load up my clip. So if I pull that in, sorry this is off camera, I did have another setup to capture this, but unfortunately Zoom hates OBS, which is what I use to do a lot of my demonstrations with, but it doesn't like it. So I've managed to get the CDC feather into the clip. What I'm going to do next is just come along, probably leave 2 or 3 millimeters so that I've prepped it like so. Now the next thing then is to split my thread. Now this is 30 denier nano silk, which is not very thick, so splitting the thread can be a challenge, and it's more challenging after 2 or 3 alcoholic ginger beers. There we go. I've not had the whiskey, I'm off that. I'm up early tomorrow, sadly. So I'm going to insert the clip, and then I can spin my bobbin up. And I like to, if I'm honest, I'd like the fibres to have been a little longer there, a wee bit short. I like more sort of straggly fibres coming off the back of this. Once I've got that spun up, I can hold everything out the way, and then as I bring it round with each turn, I'm using my thumb and forefinger, and I'm only coming slightly forward because there's something else going in at the front. There we go. Yeah, it's a wee bit shorter than I'd like. I like the fibres to come much more over and under because what you get when it's fishing, these fibres are moving around and it gives a realistic impression of legs, which it's not too bad, but it's not quite as good as I'd liked it. So the next thing then is some pure squirrel dub, and it's golden olive. This is a trout line dubbing, and again, like most things when it comes to dry flies, less is more, so I only want the tiniest little bit. I'm not going to dub it on too thickly either. I want to sweep back that CDC. Bring my thread to the front. That's looking not too shabby. Just try to clear my bench as I go here. Now, before I finish this one off, I'm going to come in with a pro marker. The Nano Silk takes colour no bother at all, which is ideal really. So get a pro marker onto the thread, and again, as with the previous fly, I'm going to coat my thread in UV resin. Especially with dries, the last thing you want to do is really go in afterwards and try and varnish the fly. You want to get it all done while you're tying. Now with this one, I'm going to grab my little Velcro brush, just tease out some of that squirrel dub at the front, and it gives the impression of the head of the fly. And there we go. So this is my emerging caddis pattern. Going to look at another emerger shortly, but I hope you like that one. Does everyone understand me okay? 'Cause I can even feel myself not speaking properly with this cold. It's really bunging me up. So what did we make of that, chaps? It's an F&F Talon Vice. I've had it for about 3 years now. I've been very pleased with it. It's a great vice. I couldn't afford really to buy a law vice. It's just a joke really. You know, that's how they can justify selling them vices for that kind of money is beyond me. But what I could buy was this, which it's not dissimilar to a law vice in its construction. I think it's probably quite closely based on the law vice, but yeah, I really like it. It's been a good vice. I've got another vice actually. This is what I was tying on before. This is a Jan Tavek rotary vice, and I liked this. I really like the way it holds the hook. So basically you screw it from the bottom up and it catches onto the hook shank, which makes it really secure. But the only problem I had with it, it wasn't great for tiny hooks like size 18 down. It was no good for that. So it's kind of retired now, I suppose. It sits in my tying room. I really like it, and I'm loath to part with it. You know, I hardly use it, but it's just got a lot of sentimental value. I put a lot of flies over on that vise, so I tend to still use it a bit. I usually take, if I'm travelling to a demonstration, I take the Yantavek vise. This kind of setup stays as it is. So let's have a quick shifty at what we're tying next, and it's an olive emerger. So it's a fairly simple fly, this, and I wasn't sure whether to actually tie it, but I was tying up some for my box, and I thought, oh, I'll just stick this in as well, because it's a good fly, catches an awful lot of fish. Excuse me. I'm going to catch again. I'm not going to use the jaw keeps here. This is a fly I'll probably fish, so hence the size of the hook. Mostly for demonstration purposes, it's always better to get oversized hooks. You know, so if you're tying emergers or dry flies or whatever, you know, I use bigger hooks, but I'm going to be using these. So this is a 333. It's at size 12. It's on a medium wire. Sorry, it's on a fine wire actually. It looks more like a medium wire to me. Now, it's finished in black nickel, and nano silk and black nickel just don't get on. It doesn't matter if you use wax or whatever. So I always put a touch of super glue onto the shank of the hook, and then I can use my thread to spread it. Now, I'm going to get a few turns and then come back up towards the eye. Then I can remove my excess. Now what I've got here is some CDC. This is really good quality stuff. It comes stacked on a card. I'll just take some off of that card. Now what I'm going to do with this, and I'll try and show you on this camera, although it would have been better to have the split screen, is I'm going to remove the stem. And I'm going to remove the stem from 3 feathers. Now, for a size 12, if you want the fly to stay afloat anyway, any less than 3 feathers, you're going to struggle. So I've had guys say to me, oh, that should be tied with 1 plume of CDC, and that should be tied with this, and you know, they're quite within the rights to have an opinion, and I'm quite within my rights to ignore them. So size 12, I'm looking at 3 plumes of CDC, and as you can see, I've removed all the stem, and the first thing I'm going to do is get a hold and turn onto the CDC, and then I'm just going to play about with it until I get the size of wing that I want, and that'll do. Once I've got that in place, I can clamp down hard on it. I can lift that out the way, a couple of turns in front. Now, instead of just cutting square away at the back here, what I want to do is I'm going to come in with my scissors, try not to cut off the wing you just tied in, and then I'm going to put a slant, and this is going to help me with the remainder of the fly. So I'll bring my thread up and round, and what I'm going to do is, as I go down the shank of the hook, I'm starting to get a taper already because I've used the cut end, if you like, to aid me in that. Now what I want to do is just try and get rid of all the loose CDC fibres that you might well be able to see on the macro lens out the way. and I've got a very pleasing taper into the fly. That's looking not too bad. Now I've got a dyed olive peacock eye here, and what I want to do is try and find a strong fibre. That one's strong, I can barely get it off the stem. And then what I'll do is I'll go and blow my nose after this one, and hopefully you'll be able to understand me a wee bit better when I come back. So I'm just using my thumbnail and thumb to strip away the fur from the peacock. Now you can buy these pre-stripped, and I very often do that, but sometimes you just don't get the colour you're after. So what I'm going to do is, now that I've stripped that away, I can just clip that, and then I can catch that in. Now this time I'm going to come all the way up to the top of the fly, and I'm going to get several turns in here in the thorax area. Now before I bring this this rib up over my thread, I'm going to get a layer of UV resin onto the black. Now you can do this with, and I do it with, super glue. So I put super glue on, and you get the same effect, but the trouble with the super glue is you do need to obviously wait for it to dry, whereas with UV resin you get instant gratification. I'm going to grab my hackle pliers and just, again, I'll use the rotary function. You've got to be very gentle with peacock herring, as I'm sure you're all aware. It's got a very bad habit of snapping off just when you don't want it to. And if you get the pre-stripped stuff, you've got to soak it in water, because it's not very pliable. It's one of the things I dislike about the stripped ones you buy. Bring that all the way up, and then I can grab my thread, just get a wee turn to hold that into place. I was going to be brave there and pull it, but I don't think I'm going to bother. Just use my scissors, and I can cure that UV. Now to finish the fly off, I've got some Troutline Ultra Dubbing Bug 2. Very creative naming, but they do make lovely stuff. So basically this is it's a small amount of dubbing, and it's got some flecks of pearlescence through it, which is ideal. Again, I don't want to dub this on too hard. I'm going to come back to the thorax. Need a little bit more. Now for the fly to sit right in the water, what you've got to do is make sure that this CDC is cocked. So to do that, I'll get that thorax finished off there. I'm going to pull the CDC back, and I'm going to front load the fly so that the CDC sits how I would like it. And as we've done previously, we can come in with a bit of UV resin and then whip finish. Now, up until about 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have bothered cutting the stem out of the CDC. I'd have just tied it in. But I was chatting to a couple of guys at the Welsh Grayling Cup, and they were saying the French and the Spanish wouldn't even dream of tying in CDC without removing the stem. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. There we go, gents. That's the first half concluded, I believe. I dare say you'll all be rushing to the toilet.
Off you go.
Don't worry, you'll be in your beds by 9:30. Okay. So, yeah, it might look ugly, but it really is a great fly for grayling. So I'm going to include it because grayling are just about still in season, and I wanted to show you these. So last time I did a Surrey Fly Dressers Guild, I was chatting to Chris McLeod, I think it was, and I said, and I tied this fly using lead foil and stuff, and he said, oh, I've got the very thing for you. So he gave me some of these Flashpoint for partridge, and they come already fully loaded with lead on the hook. Now I've looked everywhere for them, I couldn't find them. The only problem with them is they come with a barbed hook, and I don't fish barbed flies, so I've had to crush the barb down. And the other thing is, I don't like to fish with hooks that have had the barb crushed rather than a manufactured barbless hook. I think they're not designed to be barbless, they're designed to have a barb, and hence they have a barb. But it's a compromise, isn't it? I wanted the body, I didn't want the barb, so I've crushed it down, and I've just used my forceps. I've done it while you were on your tea break there, just to crush down the front here a wee bit. You see that pronounced area there. So first thing I'm going to do is, well, I've already done that as well. I've put some wax onto my thread, and what I've got thread wise is 200 denier nano silk, and I'm going to catch that on in behind the eye, one turn, and then I'm going to get onto the lead. Now, once I've got a few wraps on and I know it's not going to go anywhere, I can remove that. Now, there's quite a lot to be tied in here, so it's overly complicated. I don't tie a lot of these. I've got a few because I wanted to learn how to do it. I think they look a great fly and they do work, but you can imagine my dismay when you've hooked a tree root on the bottom of the river and you've lost this when it takes you 15-20 minutes to tie, so it can get quite emotional. First thing I'm going to do is tie in the lateral lines, and what I'm using is some micro glint. This is the dark brown, that's what the lateral lines are made from. Just take a small piece of that, and I'll catch that in. Now, I'm not overly worried about counting thread wraps at this point. I just want the two lateral lines to fall down either side of the fly. Now, the other thing that's got to go in at this stage is some nylon. Now what I've done is I've got an empty spool of thread, and I've put on some, I think it's 0.10 fluorocarbon onto this spool. I know you can't see it particularly well, but I'm going to tie that in next. Now before I do that, again, I'm going to grab my forceps here, and I've got like they're like crimped jaws, and what I want to do is I'm just flattening out that fluorocarbon, because when I tie it in, if you don't do this, what tends to happen is it just slips through the nano silk, which is quite slidey anyway. So make sure you catch that in. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to wind that up, I'm going to hang it off the side of my vise. Now, just off screen here even, I've got a little knob on the end of my vise, and I've just hung that off the edge. So next I'm going to come around again. I've got them lateral line coming down, and then I've got it to come onto the shank of the hook there. Now what I want to do, and the reason that the 200 works so well, is it's nice and thick. When I spin the bobbin anti-clockwise, it flattens out nice and flat. And then what I'm going to do now is just concentrate on trying to cover up as much of the lead as I can. Now as I get down near the bottom, I'm going to catch in some nymph skin. This is I think it's Nature Spirit that make this, but I'm just going to cut off a small amount. Now the slant is going to go away from my body, so catch that in. Again, get it down onto the shank of the hook. When I come back up, I'm going to make sure I've got it in now. Let's see what you're seeing. That's looking pretty decent. I've got a nice white base there. I'm going to bring that all the way up to the front of the hook. As you can see, the thread slipped there. You can see what I mean by, you know, you imagine you've gone to all the effort to tie this and then you lose it on the bottom. Nightmare. So with the latex that I've got here, I'm going to bring that round quite tight initially. And then as I come up the fly, I'm going to start releasing the tension on this. I just want it slightly overlapping. The time I've got to the middle of the fly, I'm hardly putting any tension on this at all. Well, look at that. Right, let me just get back. That was you with a crutch, you put me off. Right, as I was saying, I'll cut that bit out in the edit. As I bring it round, and I get nearer the front again, I'm starting to put a little bit more tension on. And as I get over the eye of the hook, I can bring that up and over, and then I'm going to get just a couple of turns in front, and I'm going to put a whip finish in. That's me done with the thick stuff, and then I can take out that extra little piece. And what I'm looking for now put away in this. So I've now got the again the nano silk, but it's the 30D. I'm going to get a couple of turns just to get me onto the shank of the hook, and then I can take away that. Now this is the tricky bit with this fly. It can be a pain, but I'm going to do my best to make it look really smooth, you know, like I did with the wrapping of the rubber. Smooth. It's all about being smooth, isn't it? So I'll grab that, I'll turn the vise so I can give myself a chance not to fail. And then I'm going to catch that in at the bottom. I'll just move it so that I can see what I'm doing. Then on this side, I'll grab it. And once you get going, actually, it's not as bad as it seems. It's fairly straightforward. But just initially getting started can be a bit tricky. This bobbin is weighted. Sorry, this one is. So the one that's here is fairly hefty. The other one, the one I'm using this tippet material with, it's a Raid Zap one, and I got talked into buying it by an Irishman, believe it or not, and I thought I was impervious to sales pitches, but he really did sell me this bobbin, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll buy it, go on, I'll have it. And having used it several, you know, I use it for this now because I don't find it's much use for anything else. It's like a lot of these fancy bobbins, the same goes for scissors to a certain extent. You can spend an awful lot of money on tools and scissors and whatnot, and then you end up reverting to form, and you go back to what you used to use. And I have to say, the exception to that has been Brian Smith's scissors. So I don't know how much internet use boys consume, but if you watch any kind of internet at all, you'll have heard of Brian Smith, the fly smith. So he does these short videos, fly tying. He's very talented. He's only been tying a couple of years actually, it's amazing. But he ties some fantastic flies, and he's now got, I think he's the most watched fly tyer in the world actually. I think that's where we are with Brian Smith. He rose to fame on TicToc, and then he moved across to the rest of the social media platforms, and he's now pretty famous. So I've got that into place, and I think the brown micro glint here just does a great job of doing those lateral lines. So this bobbin here, as I was saying, the heavy bobbin I'm using, this is one of the Flysmith's bobbins, and I kind of got this by accident as well because I wanted to buy I like these. These are the bobbins I like to use. They're dead simple, they're cheap. Well, they're not cheap, but 18 quid, and you know, they're very, very simple. You know, people go on about tension and stuff. Well, I can just bend the legs in if I want tension. I can pull them out if I want it to be a bit looser. So all that is a bit of a nonsense if you ask me. Now, I've trapped what I need to trap in, and what I want to do next is to tidy up the front of this a little bit. And I definitely want to cover that little bit of lateral line I've got there. Now, I don't know how many of you boys have heard of another American tyre called, I think his name's Brian Heiss. I think he's quite big in the competition world in America, fly fishing wise. But he ties the most realistic bugs. You can find them on YouTube, and the flies. And this is where I first seen this pattern, and I thought, oh, I'd really like to give that a go, just to see if I could. You know, you must have all found patterns that you thought, oh, I like the look of that. I wonder if I could tie it. Not that I'm going to tie hundreds of them, but it'd be nice to tie a few. So next we come on to the artistic part of the fly. I've got a pro marker here. And what I'm going to do is just at the bottom, I'm going to get some colour in. I'm not worried about it going all over the place, because what I'm going to do anyway is I'm going to come in after that with a blender pen. So you get these things for hobbycraft. In fact, hobbycraft's a great resource for any fly tire. Get yourself down to the local hobbycraft and you can find all manner of bits and bobs that you can use in your fly tying. Now at the head I'm using a darker colour here, and this is cocoa. I'm going to colour up my thread. And again I'm going to bring some of that pro marker onto the latex. Now, I don't know what it's like in Worcestershire, but down here in the south of England, come the winter months, the River Test is given over to the boys that do a lot of trotting. So they'll go on the test and they'll trot for grayling, dace, chub, you name it. They'll trot for it. And what they do is they come along, they set up their bivvies, tents, chairs, whatever, and they'll throw about 20 pound of maggots into the river. Now, unless you're completely stupid, you know that just downstream of where that boy's sitting, there's like 500 grayling sitting eating maggots. I give you my interpretation of this grayling magnet. So I could wait for that to dry and it'll probably be fine. But what really sets this off is a coat of UV resin. Yeah, it's always quite funny when you're stood about 50 metres down for the boys slinging maggots into the river, catching all the grayling. and he's had, mind you, trotting for grayling. It's such an effective way of fishing. It's very rarely, in fact, it's almost impossible for a fly angler to keep up with somebody that's got a trotting outfit on. It's just not happening. And we'll cure that off. I've got, you might have noticed I'm not a fly tying snob. I don't care what I'm tying, as long as it catches fish and it's not live or artificial. I mean, I've got no boundaries when it comes to fly tying. If somebody says tie these up, they work, I'm happy to do that. I've even stooped to egg flies at times, but I've got to admit, it's boring. You know, blobs, egg flies, they're not fun to tie. They're just boring. I'd much rather sit and just tie wet flies. To be perfectly honest, I would be completely happy doing that. And there we have a grub. I don't have any other name for it really. I mean, does it need all the lateral lines and the bit of colour? Probably not. It probably worked just as well as just a straight up maggot sort of pattern. Put a black head on it and it looks just like a maggot. But there we go. So let's go back to my face. Sorry?
Nice and juicy, that one.
Yeah, I thought you said somebody was running to the toilet to be sick. Yeah, it's I mean, it's probably about the size of a maggot. To be fair, it's very similar to a maggot. But as I said, how long did that take? It took a while, didn't it? About 15 minutes maybe, and I didn't tie that any slower than it would normally take me. And you know, when you're fishing away on a river and you lose a lot of flies. I don't know how many of you chaps fish on rivers, but you do lose a lot of flies, and if you've put so much effort into tying these sort of patterns, it's heartbreaking when you're on the bottom and you're thinking, oh no, that's another 15 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. So yeah, it's alright, but it's not something I'd be tying up hundreds of. But I think it's good for the demonstrations, and if you like that kind of thing, there's a boy called, another Scotsman called Stevie Dallas, and any of you that are visiting the BFFI fair this weekend, I think he is tying on Tyers Row, and he ties exquisite, realistic grub patterns, and they're stunning. He puts wee legs and everything onto them, but I call a hoe at that, like. Okay. I've got one more pattern for you gents, and then I've run out of my wee packets of stuff. Yeah, I didn't quite realise I was doing this evening, so my wife's now sat in the living room with a face like Fizz. I said, oh, I'll not be long. Yeah, okay. So this is what we're going to tie for our last fly. There we go. So basically it's a parachute pattern, obviously, and but it's got some interesting qualities that we'll go through as I tie it. Again, this is not a quick tie, but I do feel it's worth the effort. Some of these patterns, like the caddis grub, is it really worth the effort? I don't think so, but this is worth the effort. So again, because I'm going to be using this fly, I am going to use a realistic size hook. Now this is the Hanak 330, it's on a medium wire, it's finished in bronze, and it's on a size 12, which for most hooks, I've got to be honest, Hanak tend to make their sizing on the small side. So a size 12 is more akin to a size 14 if you were a fan of the Kamasan hooks back in the day. I think I used to tie all my flies on Kamasan hooks. I hardly see them nowadays. So I'm just getting some wax onto my nano silk, and I'm gonna just get a bed of thread. Down. Now, I've got some of this stuff. It's from Semplify. Now, what do they call it? It's like micro crystal flash. I think that's the name of it. Now I'm going to take off a little bit, and what this is going to do, it's going to give me the impression of a trailing shuck. That's what the idea of it is. Now, just off camera, I've just cut that away. I want 3 strands that are going to protrude from the bottom of the fly. And I'll bring that all the way down. Quite far down the fly, and once I've got to the bottom, I can take away the excess. So that's going to give me my trailing shuck. Now on the way back up, I'm going to catch in a strand of this. Now what it is peccary. It's really hard to come by in this country. I've just sent over to America to get some natural and some dyed yellow for fly patterns that I want to tie. But it is definitely worth having. It gives a really pleasing effect. So I'm just going to take the tip away because I want some of that colour to come into the fly. So I'll catch that in. In fact, I'm going to come back up in open turns, and I'm going to catch it in at the top there, and then I'll come all the way down to secure it into place. Back up again. Now, next then, I'm going to tie in my post. So, post's a very personal thing. You can pick which colour you like. Now, I always like pink, and the reason I like pink is, to my eyes, I can pick it up on the water. As soon as the fly lands, I can see, well, obviously I cast to where I want it to go. That never happens, by the way. But when I look up, I can see the pink post almost immediately. So I'm in contact with my fly. I can see what's happening. It's drifting down. I can make sure I've got slack line, and I am in control, kinda. It might be that orange works better for you. It might be white. I used white for many years, but then I found suddenly that actually I see the pink a bit better. So how I'm going to tie the post in, I'm going to lay it on top of the shank, pinch and loop over the top. Once I'm happy it's sitting on the top of the shank, I can take that away. Again, I'm going to come in at an angle and just create a taper there. I'll just tidy this up quickly. I'll be doing more work on it later, but just to keep the fibres kind of out the way. Now, what I want to do next is get a few thread wraps in front of the post. Now, you can get a gallows tool. I'm sure some of you are aware of that, but I've got a gallows tool, but I don't like it. I find it just gets in my way, so I muddle through with what I've got, which is my left hand, and every time I turn round or and just hold it into place. It's maybe not the most efficient way that you've seen, but it works for me. Okie dokie. Now, next thing I'm going to do is grab my super glue. What I want to do is just get the tiniest bit of super glue onto that post, and what that will do is it will help me have a firm base for my hackle to go into place. Now, before I go on, I'm going to tidy up this part here. Doesn't need to be super tidy, but I do want to create the taper for the emerger, as well as get a solid black base there. Now, this time I'm going to come in front of my post. Just going to trim the top of this. I know it's not on your screen, but it's getting on my nerves. There we go. Just damp that down, try and keep it out of the way. So I'm going to get several extra turns in at the front. Now, peccari is it's a pig, but I mean, it's a pig to tie with, and it's actually from a pig, but it's quite brittle, so this one I think's quite old. I'm going to try desperately to avoid the hook point, because I think if I catch the hook point with this, it will be an early bed time for me. An early bedtime in the spare bed, if my wife's got anything to do with it. Now, I'm doing my best to try and keep this with touch and turns, and I can already see the peccaries trying to split as I'm going round the shank. I mean, I know boys that swear by counting the turns and being really exact, but I think that's more for fly tying than it is for fishing. I mean, you've got to remember, especially in a river, these flies are wheeking past the fish at like Mach 2. They're not getting to sit. It's not like going to a restaurant and reading a menu. They've got to decide in pretty short order, am I eating that or not? And whether you've got a wee gap in your tying, or you're not quite happy with the way the wing's sitting, the fish don't care, you know. I know guys that go on about they won't tie it on unless it's perfect. I tie any old shite onto my cast and I still seem to manage to catch a few fish. So I've got the peccari in place. It's not too bad. There's a wee some wee bits and bobs, but what will save you a lot of bother is another wee coat of resin. I'll be sending you boys the bill for this Solaris. It costs a fortune and I've used a load of it tonight. Yeah, but you don't get the wee brush. See this wee brush? This is what I like the most about this resin. So it's, in fact, I'm not even sure it's Solaris that's still in this bottle. I think I might have bought some for Hobbycraft and poured it into the bottle so I could keep the brush. But I don't understand why manufacturers of fly tying stuff can't do that. So I was sent some. I've been sent lots of stuff over the years, but I get sent resin and they send it with this muckle big brush that I could paint my kitchen with. I'm thinking, well, what good's that to a fly tire? You know what I mean? So there we go, we've got our segmented body and it's got a nice touch of colour in it, which I think might attract a few fish. So next then, I'm going to take a feather from I've got a half cape here. I never buy full capes because I'm quite old and I just think I'll be dead before I use a full cape. I might as well just get a wee short one that'll do me for the rest of my days. And they're so expensive now, capes. Jeez, oh. It's ridiculous, actually. Okay, so another thing that I would usually do, shoot me if I've overstepped, but I would never usually do all this nonsense. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to strip out one side of the feather so that I can have a really neat hackle. I only do this on fly tying demonstrations. Normally I'd be throwing this right in there and just wrapping it round, getting as many turns as I can, because what it's about is getting the fly to float. I mean, of course I care, I do care. I care what the fly looks like, but not to the point it's got to be perfect, you know, but it's a fly tying demonstration, so let's try and make it as neat as we can. Right, so I've got my feather. It's looking not too shabby. Now, what I want to do is I'll dress it up to my post, and then I can come in, catching on my side. Just turn the vise around so you can see how I've caught that in. So I've caught that on my side with the stem going towards the eye, and then what I'm going to do is just get it up alongside the post, a few turns to get that into place. And then I'm going to bring my thread around and I'm back to my body side of the fly. Now the thorax, I'm going to be using some squirrel dubbing. It's just plain. It's cut very small, and it just dubs on, no problem at all. It's really nice to work with. Now, as ever, less is more. So we'll get that on. I'll just put that little bit I've got left at the side to my vise. And then I'm going to start building the thorax, come around the front. I'm going to need a little bit more. Pull that back. I'll come all the way to the eye, and then I'll come all the way back up to my post. Now when I go round this time, I'm going to come around the back of my post and I'm going to rest my thread towards the front of the fly, this side of the post. This side of the post here. And then what I can do is just break the stem And I've got a long enough feather here is that I don't need my hackle pliers, but sometimes I just feel like I've got a wee bit more control when I use hackle pliers to do this. Again, it's always the starting off. Once you've got started, it's easy. It just seems to flow. But getting started, that's the skill, I suppose. Now, I know a lot of boys, and I've seen a lot of flies that you can buy in shops, and they've got these huge, big, thick arrow wing posts. That's not what supports the fly in the water. It's the hackle. The post does very little, unless of course you've tied it like an egg fly and it's just a bung. But for a fishing fly, it's just there to support the hackle. The hackle's what keeps the fly afloat in the water. So I still use my fingers for the parachute style flies. So I'm going to put a half hitch. I'm going to just make sure I come holding that in place, and then I'll do the same. And it's only recently, actually, well, comparatively recently, that I started using a whip finish tool, and that was only because of the YouTube stuff, really, or I'd still be hand finishing my flies now. But somebody said I needed to do it properly, so I went away and learned. The strange thing is, I can barely do without a whip finish tool now. It's very weird how you get used to doing something so quickly. I can come in and just take away that tip. Now, the next thing, just to finish off and belts and braces the fly itself, I'm going to grab my dubbing needle, tiniest bit of super glue, and where I cut my feather and whip finished the fly, I'm just going to add the tiniest spot of super glue. And then I can come in and trim my post. Now, trimming the post, you've got to remember, if you've got a big massive post, you can see the fly better, but what tends to happen is it will topple over in the water. So I tend to just keep mine between 1/2 centimetre, maybe 3/4 of a centimetre, and I can see that perfectly well on the water. And there we go. That's my wee peccary emerger. And that, my friends, is all I have for you this evening. So I'm happy to take any questions or any of the flies we've tied tonight, or anything else for that matter. I know quite a lot about whiskey. I quite like ginger beer, so any questions on that. I dare see you boys when you want to talk about the Six Nations, because Scotland's really going to give you a whooping when it's your turn. No, I hope you enjoyed that, gents.
We're going to a lunch shortly, as the club in May. What would you recommend that we use there?
In May,
Yeah.
the buzzer fishing in May will be fantastic on Rutland. Yeah. I doubt you'll need much else. Depending on how the rest of the winter goes. Yeah, buzzers. Midge tips, washing line tactics with a team of buzzers, a booby on the point. But hopefully you'll just need to straight line buzzers. You would get them under an indicator, but as you know, Rutland, it's fairly deep, and your maximum sort of depth with an indicator would be about 12 feet, which is fine because there'll be a lot of fish around that depth. But it's what I've noticed over the years with Rutland, and I've fished it for 30 years, is that it used to be in April you would turn up and you would fish a fast sinking line with lures, a blob or a booby or something like that, and you'd be counting down a DI7, there was no DI8s back then, 20 to 25 seconds before you started your retrieve, because all the fish would be on the deck. But in recent years, even in April, I've found myself in just a sweatshirt and fishing buzzers as early as April. And as the month of April goes on, if it's warm, early May, and did you say the 4th of May roundabouts? Sorry? Oh right, yeah. So it should be well warm by then. You might even be onto nymphs, so things like crunchers, dialbacks, fished on a midge tip with a booby on the point, fishing the top 3 or 4 feet of water, and you should catch plenty of fish. Rutland's always good up until about the end of June, and then after that, you're going to have to dig out, you know. There's always the boils. Thanks very much, gents, and have a safe trip home.